one of the few schools in the country that has the cyber ops or whatever they call it now designation. So anyhow, give like a short kind of career timeline for me. Very helpful in kind of putting in perspective. I graduated here, computer engineering. At that time, there was one class that you could take that was called network security, and it was a grad elective. And so you could get as a senior, you could take it as one of your electives. But they didn't have a large amount of that. I went into software engineering after UC, worked at Apple for a little while. Then I left Apple, worked at a startup. Then I got laid off from the startup. And then I worked for GE Aerospace for the bulk of my career. That's actually where I started cybersecurity. We'll actually talk a little bit later about some of the threat evolution I got to see while I was there. It was really neat, but kind of some career progression stuff down here as well. I started out as a engineer, so using my software engineering skills, building network sensors for them. Then worked up to malware analysis, which was very natural fit for me because in the prior roles, I had a lot of like debugging works, a lot of kind of low level assembly language level failure analysis and stuff like that, and performance analysis of code. That lent itself really well to decompiling reverse engineering malware samples when we started catching them with the new network sensors that were deployed. I helped build GE, what's now GE Aerospace, formerly GE Aviation. I helped build their cyber intelligence program there. And so I was the kind of program manager for that for a long time. And then I took a kind of principal position there as a cyber intelligence analyst and basically worked there from like 2010 through 2022 or something like that. I left there to go to another company, Vector Zero, which is the big red box on here. That was another startup. They were working on what's called attack surface management software, which is a fancy way of merging vulnerability assessment and inventory together. So one of the big challenges of all that I learned working at GE is and you all may have run into this as well, is that knowing what is plugged into your network, knowing all of that stuff, the attack surface around it, where the vulnerabilities are, who's responsible for it, all that stuff's a big problem. And it just keeps growing and growing and growing. So anyway, I was at that startup, got laid off again. So you can see a pattern here, startup, then layoff. And then Deep Seas, I got hired at Deep Seas at the end of last year, so back in August. So Deep Seas has as I mentioned, has a really neat nexus back to GE Aerospace. The MDR portion of Deep Seas started as a startup right around this point in my career that was founded by my former CISO over at GE Aerospace when he left. So if some of you are familiar as Brian Minnick, who's now over at Fifth Third, I believe, right? So he founded it as Morphic, and then I got bought by Booz Allen Hamilton, the famous defense contractor. And then they spun it off last year into this company, Deep Seas, which merged it with another security company, Security on Demand as well. And so I had maintained friends with a large number of people who also went over there from GE, but it's a real neat environment. Anyhow, this is kind of the career progression in a nutshell. I will say that of all the different skills that I picked up and everything like that, I think the ability to do like software engineering, software development, that type of stuff was key. Was like very instrumental in being able to make a lot of the cybersecurity stuff work really well. So also, I'm happy to answer any questions if anyone has any. So you can stop me versus saving it until the end. So because I basically have a handful of slides where I go through. So one of the things that I kind of like to recommend, especially to folks like yourselves who are still in college, is the open source software contributions. Really good way to, number one, practice your skills on like an existing code base. Usually, most of them have needs and asks that are on a issues list or something like that. So there's a lot of very easy kind of direction there to figure out, hey, what's a problem that I can go and fix in this? It's a good way to like self-educate if you want to, say, learn a new technology. I'll kind of get into that later on too. But another thing that I've learned from being in this industry is that everything that's new today becomes old and obsolete a lot quicker than you expect it to. And so being able to kind of have those skills of, learning a new technology, learning a new language, learning a new framework, etc., is really key. And, so I listed some on here. I'm by no means a like power contributor to these, but there are a bunch of few projects that I have contributed to in the past. It makes like really good resume building material for technical hiring managers. It gives them an opportunity to actually go and look and see what you might, what your code might look like, right, in a work setting. So it gives them a nice thing to kind of build off of from there. I also picked this up because of this is a nice, what do you call it? A case study, I guess, is the best way to put it. That said, things like GitHub and open source projects and all that stuff are proliferating a lot. And this kind of ties into what I call not what I call, what a lot of people call like software supply chain risks. So I like to pick this one out because I was looking around for, I can't remember why I came upon it, but I ended up on the right-hand side of this, discovering and worked it backward. So a long time ago, I was working on a laptop that I had from a job, probably from that first startup, and the mouse on the laptop was not working with the FreeBSD operating system I had installed on it. So I went into the source code, figured out what was wrong, contributed a fix up here, and that, of course, got like fed into this project with that version. And then that project got rolled into what most of you, if you use Linux or any of that stuff, if you use Linux, probably parts of Mac OS now too, all of those things use the same like windowing system for displaying all the graphical user interface and everything. So it kind of got rolled into the project that's used for that. And then Samsung and the Linux Foundation decided to take a bunch of that code and rolled it into this project, which was a more kind of corporate supported visual operating system package that they wanted to use for embedded devices, which fed into their smart TVs and other, like their smartwatches use it, everything uses it. And then rolls up into the automotive companies decided to put together an automotive grade Linux package after a handful of like fits and starts with the in-vehicle infotainment systems, right? So when they were all working on their own, and the same was true with the Samsung smart TVs and everything too, they all had their own platforms, and then they decided, hey, this is very unmanageable for us to maintain. We're going to consolidate these into a common platform, and they all picked Linux. And so the reason I find this is funny is because I can go to all of their Git repos, and I can go and look in the history that they've cloned from other repos and other repos before those, and I can go and find this like whole commit is like laying in their source code tree, and that code is deployed to all of these random things now. Something that like I was just like mad at my laptop a long time ago before like I even had like a smartphone in my pocket. But the reason I bring this up is that that is not an isolated case. This is how most of these devices, like including like this thing here and my phone, which is running Android OS, and like the touchscreen system in your car, your smart TVs, like all of like that one over there, probably. All of those things are basically running operating systems that are cobbled together from software that was contributed by like thousands and thousands of people over random periods of time. And that like complex problem scope is not going to change anytime soon, and it becomes a real big challenge for like validation and testing. You want your car to work really well, right? You don't want your car to power off while you're driving it or something like that. But you've got all of these different pieces of software that feed into that thing that came from all of these other random people and random projects and random efforts leading up to that. And someone or some company needs to basically validate that all of that code is good and all of it works and it doesn't have malware in it, doesn't have bugs in it. And that's a very hard problem, and it just is getting harder. So like that area, there's a lot of work in that space, both research work and also like attempts to try and fix that. So if any of you have ever heard like the term software bill of materials, I know that depending upon where you work, it might be something that's being pushed with like government regulations and stuff like that. This is the problem that they're trying to solve, right? This is the problem they're trying to get their arms around with kind of regulations and projects like that. So the other thing that I learned, I mentioned earlier, was that a lot of technology like evolved over time. So this is just like in the past, maybe like 15 years or something like that. When I started working at GE, I was a Perl programmer, which I don't even know if any of you have used Perl, if anyone still does. Yeah, I don't know, raise your hands if anyone even knows what like the Perl language is or has used it. Yeah. So back in 2010, that was probably the most popular scripting language. So, and Python was, Python and Ruby and a handful of other ones that never really went anywhere were all these kind of like little alternatives to it that looked cool, but no one, was really like jumping on them. And then just about like in this span of time, I'm trying to think, it was probably about 2013 or 2014 or something like that. So Python or Perl was started in the 90s or something, really started taking root in the 90s, but really only had like maybe about a 12-year or 13-year lifespan, right? And now Python is probably one of the most popular scripting languages that that anyone uses. And for the most part, I would gather that, I don't know how many people here use Python for stuff. It's like probably everyone, yeah. At least double the number of people who've seen Perl. So that is just like, a short shift. The other thing is C and C++ have long dominated kind of lower level programming. C, like even before I was born, but more recently they've been introducing Rust and Swift and Go as like viable modern alternatives to that. Most of those are relatively newer, but who knows what that landscape's going to look like in the next 10 years or so. One of the interesting things about that is that these are now new languages that, if you're going to do like a malware analysis job or something like that, or you're going to do, software packaging or, software engineering, like compliance work or anything like that. These are new languages that, you need to take into consideration. And in this particular case, the old ones don't also go away. So now you've got, where you had 2, now you have like 5, right? Client-side Java and Flash, which again, I'm not sure how many of you remember those, but basically like in-browser Flash animations, in-browser Java applets, all of those things that were very popular vectors for attack, they both were killed off in favor of like more modern, HTML browser solutions and JavaScript. But who knows? Maybe that has a lifespan to it as well. We're also seeing, and you all are probably familiar with using, Node.js for doing any sort of like server-side development, stuff like that. But again, 10 years ago or whatever, Java and Cold Fusion dominated a lot of that in the web server space. Cloud computing, I looked it up not too long ago. I always like to hit on this because the way that it gets talked about in a lot of companies today is like it's been around forever, but really the cloud computing as you think of it in terms of like AWS and Azure and Google Cloud and that type of stuff is really only about 10 to 15 years old. And the modern incarnation is probably less than So if you log into AWS and Azure, the things that you expect to be there, less than 10 years old. And so that's basically 10 years ago, putting anything in the cloud and there being a cloud for stuff to be hosted in was like not even a major, like was not even an architectural concept, right? Or at least not a widely adopted one. So smartphones, again, 15 years old. So like 15 years ago, I would not be able to walk around with the internet in my pocket, right? I would not be able to like try and answer whatever question came to mind by just standing and pausing and looking it up on my phone. And then Linux, so Linux OS was not very widely deployed, and now it's probably more ubiquitous than, you probably have more Linux devices in your house just by virtue of all the embedded systems that run, that follow this exact same, proliferation. You probably have more Linux devices in your house than Windows devices or Mac devices these days. Even, your thermostat, probably, if you have a smart thermostat, probably running Linux. If you have, your car is probably running Linux, probably running at multiple places. So anyhow, that's the reason I bring this up is like, this is a constantly changing, what we call an attack surface. So the technology that, say, you're trying to protect is constantly changing, and having to stay up on top of this stuff is a huge body of work, is a huge amount of effort. And then so then this is kind of getting down in the weeds to one of the threats that I dealt with say around 2010 or so. So one of the kind of adversarial intrusion strategies, and I've actually got I think like 4 different slides here to walk through the evolution of them. But one of the things I learned in trying to defend against a lot of the intruders that we had was that they also evolved their behaviors. And you can watch this over a long period of time. So kind of when I started at GE, a lot of the traditional attack structure was like this. So the adversaries would identify a target that they wanted to try and get, the secrets from. So in the case of, you might have someone trying to steal military secrets. You might have someone trying to get in to steal, PII or something like that, right? Typically what they do is they'd scan the network perimeter. Most companies, or at this time, all companies at this time basically hosted their, web-facing infrastructure in data centers, and all of this stuff was networked through the corporate network. So this is, again, pre-cloud stuff. The adversary would try and find the weak points, maybe find out that they're all running a common version of Cold Fusion as the backend, which was basically if you wanted to build web servers out of Flash, it's Cold Fusion. And when they did that, they would go and compromise, say, all of the web servers they could identify that had that weakness. So in this case, I just put 3 on here. And then they'd put their tools in all 3 of them, but then only use one of them to try and start probing the interior network and try and find their way to, say, a privileged box that happens to bridge a gap between, say, the regular corporate network and maybe some secret, file share or something like that, or some secret enclave. In fact, literally, you'd have some computers that would have, or some servers that would have 2 network cards in it, and basically have a network card that could access the private, the secret network, and another one that would access the rest of the corporate network, right? So they do that. And the reason they do this, and this was a common strategy, there was actually a lot of, it's very interesting. There are some academic papers published by some of the earlier Chinese hacking groups about this strategy, but the idea was they could compromise all 3 of these, just use one of them, and then when the defenders or when the network owners found that anything found them in the network, they would trace it back to this entry point, but they would not see any of these other ones if no activity was going on with them. So then they assume they kick the attackers out by cleaning up this system and then cleaning up all the intermediate systems that led them to the secrets. And the attackers would, take a pause for a while and then come back, and they've already got tools on this box, and they would basically repeat the process. So they use that as a way of basically building redundancy into their attacks. So using some of the same sort of mechanisms that you'd use for building connectivity in a corporate network, but going in reverse, connectivity for the adversaries. So one of the Achilles heels for this is that you still got one set of attacker infrastructure that was targeting each one of these things. Eventually, after say 2 or 3 or 4 of these being investigated, eventually you find out, say, where they're coming from, and you can apply a more systemic fix. Or you find out that there's a common link between the software that's installed on all these systems, and you realize, like,
Is this something with the SolarWinds attack?
I will get to the SolarWinds attack. But yeah, it's this is I would say a precursor to that, or predecessor to that. So this is how some of the I think like the Operation Aurora attack would have been similar to this, which was the one that like targeted Google and a number of other tech companies back in the 2000s. So this attack has a lot of remote access direct connections from the adversary. There's tools that were copied on all these things. So another Achilles heel to this, or another flaw to this attack, or weakness to it, I should say, is that, hey, if I have all the files from here, then all I really need to do is look for those files on all the rest of my systems, right? But to a much less mature security program, like was common in the 2000s, before a lot of companies even started building like CISO roles and stuff like that had a whole teams under them. This was highly successful, and it was a way to basically maintain access. They might get kicked out here once trying to steal the secrets, but then they know the 3, 4, or 5 steps they need to do to get back to them, right? And so they just know that, like, hey, I just am on the clock as soon as I get in, that type of thing. Yeah.
So going back to that last slide, let's say
this one, right?
Say the organization figures out that one of their web-facing servers got like compromised or whatever, and then they remediate it, right? But the attacker still has those other beachheads.
Yep.
Could they like replicate like make that server that was just replicated beachhead again?
Yeah. So hypothetically, they could. Normally, what would end up happening is when they did the investigation that remediated this server up here, they would have also concluded that what was vulnerable about that server, what was the weakness in that server, right? So if the corporate was, a corporation was doing the full remediation job, they would also fix the bug, fix the flaw, right? But they might not choose to do that on all of these systems. And also, if the adversaries already deployed tools on the other systems, those remote access tools have already, like bypassed the weakness.
So what I'm saying is, theoretically deploy those tools from one of the other beachheads to
yeah, if they wanted to, if they had access to get it in there. So I would say that from a tactics perspective, they would probably, in my experience, they would typically leave the one that just got fixed alone, because they would anticipate that that's the one that monitoring is being put around, and a higher amount of visibility is being put on. So, but yeah, they could definitely come, and we saw that a lot of times. So like this bubble that's here bridging the secrets, that would be an example of one that very frequently we'd see them find a system internally that would be very sensitive, and they would keep that in mind, so that anytime they came back in through one of these other paths, they would immediately start trying to go into that one system and, like you said, compromise it again. Oops, that Yeah, you're right. The button is touchy. So, so that that attack is where, or I should say, some of the flaws to that attack are where, in my opinion, a lot of the kind of spear phishing and like targeted phishing strategy emerged to try to help them, thwart some of the defenses that were at play there. And so we're all pretty familiar with phishing here, but basically the phishing chart or phishing intrusion looks very similar to this, except that instead of it being web servers that they're using for access, it's individual users' PCs or individual users' assets. And they're still delivering malware to the user systems. To a great extent, the adversary is still having to directly communicate with the pieces of malware on the end user systems. But the phishing attacks are ones that can be carried out where they, change the different themes and everything like that, even change the different tools that are being used and deployed on the user systems, such that it can become, it can become a lot more difficult to identify, say, if I go and investigate one user's compromise, not guaranteed that all of those tools are going to be the same for the other users, because you're really just trying to get users to open a file, run a program on their computer, that type of thing. Yeah.
Can't they just determine which users are compromised by just asking who clicked on the link?
If it's all the same link. So if they came, and this is where the concept of spear phishing comes along, is if they try and deliver the attack using multiple different waves of phishing, or maybe targeting different users with different different links, or a single person, then it becomes a lot more difficult to do exactly that type of investigative work. So the users themselves end up becoming that new like beachhead concept. They tend to be a lot more embedded in the network too. So you're not typically having users, present in a data center. They're at, different offices and different sites all over the place, and they have different access levels. Let's see, another common thing from this that we would see, and this kind of gets at some of the, some of the kind of multiple waves that they would go with, is you go and phish a few users. Then when you have access to their system, you can learn who they talk to. You could learn, other people to target with phishing. You can learn better ways to target those people with phishing. And then you can come back and do another wave and just keep repeating it. Because a lot of this still relies upon direct communication links back to the adversary, there's still, the possibility, or I should say the problem, of having malware communications are ones where you can detect them after doing some analysis, and then you can basically block them at the corporate perimeter, right? So, and then that becomes a systemic mitigation that can be implemented, at least to stop like that wave of attacks and force the attacker to go and like get new DigitalOcean systems or something like that. So, yeah. Any more questions on this one? So then, as a improvement on that, to try to eliminate some of the attribution, which is kind of what that's called, where you can tie it back to where the adversary is, what the adversary's network is, to try and cut off some of that attributional information and weakness. What we saw in the early 2010s was what was called the Web C2 strategy. So that's was published by Mandiant and FireEye's like APT1 report, if you've ever had to read that, or McAfee published it as the Shady Rat. So if any of you are familiar with like the co-founder of CrowdStrike, Dmitry Alperovich, who's always on, he's like cybersecurity expert, always on TV now, being a contributor for one of the cable news or something like that. He published one of the two main reports that discovered this attack strategy. And how this worked was your corporate network especially in the early 2010s, corporate network, say a big company like a Ford or GM or whoever, they pay a decent amount for security, right? They'll, more than the normal company. But then these random other nonprofit entities like, DMV, or maybe like a local church that has a website, or a local like high school or something like a local private school or something like that, they don't have budget to pay for security, like even a security person or anything like that. So what these guys found was like, hey, if we go and compromise these things and then program the malware to talk to these things instead of talking directly to me, then the traffic almost hides within normal user noise, because users, at work, they're going to like, get a text from family or something like that, and go log into their, kid's school's website from work, right? People do this on their work asset, on their work PCs all the time. Go and pay their DMV bill, right? Online. Go visit their church website online to figure out what the volunteer schedule is or something like that. So if they can go and compromise all of these and then install, the malware servers on these things, and then when they phish the users' systems are talking to these, then it becomes much more difficult for a security department to identify what traffic is the bad traffic, because a whole bunch of users talking to, or looking at 3 or 4 or 400 different like nonprofits websites is not actually like all that uncommon, right? So this was called they call it the Web C2 strategy. It was like web command and control. The other approach was that they would hide a lot of the information. So instead of directly communicating bidirectionally with these, they would actually just log into the systems and update, say, the HTML code comments or something like that. So something that wouldn't be visible to the user. And all of these users, the malware in all these user systems was actually just like downloading the main HTML page or something like that regularly, and using the comment tags. So sometimes they also call it the comment attacks. Using the comment tags, all of the instructions for what the malware should do were embedded in those. And so any of these user systems would just be like, it would look like I'm refreshing a web page once an hour or something like that. It was a very clever way to basically like hide this activity right here in the noise of normal, user procrastination traffic, for lack of a better term. So the adversary also didn't need the direct access, so they could install a bidirectional service on here as well, and then they could command the backdoor to basically connect to that. And then the adversary just needs to talk to these from their own infrastructure, and all of these organizations are ones that will never have the budget to pay for us, even a moderate cybersecurity program. So that was very clever. And then this kind of gets to the SolarWinds, except I did not capture that specific one up here in one of these clouds, but the whole SolarWinds thing is basically a remote management software. So companies will install SolarWinds on, or SolarWinds product, I forget the name of the product, SolarWinds the company, but they'll install their product on a bunch of IT assets, and you can use that to go and remotely manage the systems, right? But it's basically what I call a supply chain attack. And it's very similar to this, but the difference between these two is that all of these entities right here are entities that do some sort of business with the corporation who's the ultimate target. So not only will they be hiding in the noise here by using those, but also all of the people working in the corporate network here more likely to have a above average trusted relationship with any of these companies. So you can see like, like for instance, UC might be a bad example, but take any corporation downtown with a big office building, right? Most of them don't even own those office buildings. Those office buildings are owned by leasing companies. The HVAC that, the HVAC systems that are there, those are all maintained by these contractors, like contract companies that when something breaks, they're paid to come in and repair it. And they have a trust relationship with, say, the operations manager of the company, right? Or the leasing company. So if they, for instance, get compromised, then the adversary can use their network to basically send an email maybe to one of these people who happens to be the operations manager, who's more likely to open the PDF that's attached to it and then also click the warning button that says activate, run all the scripts in this PDF or whatever. I forget what that button says now, but the run all the scripts button. So that's how they're taking advantage of it now. And yeah, the SolarWinds attack was a very good example of this. The interesting thing about the SolarWinds attack was that they compromised SolarWinds, and then SolarWinds had automatic release builds going on. So they had like a nice, continuous integration, continuous deployment pipeline, so that when they push their code changes to the system, that would get built into a new installer package, and then it would get pushed out to the web-facing systems that all their customers would be looking at for automated updates, right? So what the bad guys did was they got into that, and then they deployed their malware into the next update of the SolarWinds agent, and that got pushed out automatically. And then all the customers for SolarWinds ended up installing that backdoor as soon as it got pushed up to their release cloud. But they did that because they all had an above average trust relationship with the network that SolarWinds was releasing stuff from. There was another, the NotPetya attack, which is a little bit older, but used the same sort of vector as well, which they were using a software called MeDocs, which is basically just like a document management software of some sort, and did the same thing. And then that one was notorious because it targeted specifically Ukrainian like government military targets, and so it was long suspected to be a targeted Russian attack. But yeah, so this is I kind of basically at GE when I started, this was like the most prevalent attack, and I got to watch the threat actors gradually over the course of a decade evolve their strategy through these different phases into this, and they're still still evolving today. So, but yeah, and then I think that's the end. That's the last slide. But I'm happy to take any questions or comments. Yeah.
So what do you think about the IoT devices that we have today?
Yeah.
Do you continue using those, or?
I mean, yeah. So I'd say, for the most part, that's a function of just be aware of the risk, right? So, one strategy that I've seen people take is because you can get wireless routers relatively affordably now. Have a separate wireless network that all of your IoT devices, join to. That isn't the one that you do any of your work from, and you can set up a server to basically isolate that segment of network. That's a typical strategy that a lot of companies use too. They'll call it like the BMS network for the building management system network, or they'll call it the the OT network or something like that. But basically have apply network isolation, and then you can put all those things into a dedicated IoT network. And then you can also put additional monitoring on the link that would connect that to your internet connection. If those things need to talk over the internet, right? Which that's the other problem too, is increasingly a lot of them do. So, if you want to take the more secure step, there's that. But it's more, most of it's just like just be aware of that risk, and then be aware of like ways that you can mitigate it. Do research on some of those devices too. You can still get some devices that some IoT devices that offer a local managed mode, so don't need to talk to the internet constantly, and so you can separate them that way. So I wouldn't, I'm not a, uh, burn it all to the ground and get technology out of the life type person. Just be aware. I've got a crap ton of those things too myself. Yeah.
This is really, anyways, but yeah. So over the summer, like last summer, I did a thing where it's like a research. Anyways, it was robust side channel attacks.
Yeah.
And we talked about kind of like how like you can get encryptions based off of power surges when certain operations are run
Yeah.
for IoT devices. And one of the things that we worked on was thermostats.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
But I am burn everything to the ground. Yeah, so if you're like really worried about it, you could do a DMZ. I think it's demilitarized zone.
Yeah.
Those aren't really secure, but it will get you what you're looking for.
Yeah. Yeah, and that was more or less what I was attempting to describe, but I forgot the term. Yeah. So, but yeah, the idea is that all lives off on its own network, and then you can, I recommend doing is you can put like network sensing and stuff like that, firewall rules in place to prevent, like for instance, prevent those things from talking to any of your like regular computers and stuff. And you can even separate them even further, right? So you can put them on, you can set it up on some of those access points so that they can only talk to the gateway. And so to talk to each other, they'd have to go through something that has a firewall installed, and and then you enforce that. So, cool. I don't know. Any other questions? All right, everyone. Thanks for having me. Hopefully, this was enjoyable.
For those watching online, thank you for watching. Apologize for the audio issues in the beginning. If you didn't just watch it, so no worries about it. You guys, do it. You guys were great. Thank you.